Hi everyone and welcome to Redefine Game Dev. I'm Adrian and we are gonna start a new stream called Unity Basics 2021. Here we will learn how to use Unity from beginning, and of course I'll give you a lot of tips and tricks along the way. In parallel, I will start tomorrow another series which is gonna be a regular video series as usual, but it will be focused more learning C# from scratch in Unity. So if you're interested in that, you should check the video coming out tomorrow. Now let's get started. So I usually put my headphones first. Okay, so the agenda for today is as follows. I'll look into the following: why you should use Unity, what can Unity do for you, how to install Unity, how to use Unity Hub, Unity's interface, the asset store, and of course the common question, what is URP or Universal Render Pipeline? So if you're interested, stay tuned because more is coming soon. First, I'll start out with a small QA because a lot of questions have been asked on Discord and other stuff, so let's quickly dive in. What is game development? Of course, since you're already here, you probably know it's, well, someone said, yeah, it's, well, making games. How do I make a game? Simple. You can use directly C++, C#, but it's much easier to use a tool like Unity, which provides a lot of features out of the box. So that is very simple to use. Do I need to learn a programming language to create a game? No. There are other ways. Of course, there are engines that allow you to create a game without any knowledge. But I suggest, if you want to do more advanced stuff, to start learning today a little programming, because it will help you on the long run. Okay, and the last question before we actually go into Unity: if this is so complex, how can there be solo developers? Well, with leveraging tools like Unity or Blender or other tools, we can actually create games on our own. Of course, we cannot create AAA games, but we can use the asset store or other services, or even create simple graphics ourselves. So we can actually create games that do good. Okay, cool. Now let's start with why you should go with Unity. I think probably the most important is Unity has the biggest community out there. So if you are looking into a lot of help, then you'll get a lot of forums and questions and answers and stuff all around. So that's the most important. The second one is that Unity is a powerful engine. It's capable of having AAA quality as Unreal, but of course the community compensates, so I think it's better. And the easy part between C# in Unity and C++ in Unreal, I think it's much easier to learn C# and use than the one in Unreal. Okay, now let's get started with how to get Unity, where to get it from, what are the different versions, some questions regarding the version numbers, and so on and so forth. Okay, cool. I'll drop in on the Unity's official page. So let me remove a little my webcam, because you can see here. So this is the official Unity page. They change it sometimes, so don't worry about that. But the main thing here is, of course, get started. And they put you to business for some reason, but you can go individual and get it for free. You can use Unity for free up until if you make $100,000 US, so that's really good. So it's this personal version. So yeah, that's something that you should take into account. But if you download this, so if you get it from the site, you will end up with something called Unity Hub. I don't know if Fall Guys was made with Unity. I think so. It's a really powerful engine, so you should definitely check it out if you haven't already. Okay, Unity Hub. So here probably when you start it, you won't have any project and you need to go to installs, and here you'll install your Unity versions. Currently on my PC I have 2021.1 and 2020. Of course, you can locate and add new versions to your system. If you're developing something that you want it more stable, because Unity adds features, keeps tracks of bugs and updates all the time, you can go with the long-term support. This is what LTS means. Of course, you can go with the latest. I actually use the beta version, the pre-release 2021. So if you're developing a game that you want it for production, I suggest you should not go with the latest, because it might crash on you. It might have unexpected behaviors which you don't want. But of course, if you're just experimenting, I suggest you go at the latest and see what it comes with. But that's it for Unity versions. So if you have a project that is made with a Unity version and you have a bigger Unity version, let's say you made a project with 2020 and you have only 2021, you can upgrade. Usually Unity offers the possibility to upgrade the project from the lower version to the higher version. The backwards way from the upper version 2021 to 2020, sometimes it might not be possible. Of course, in this upgrade, sometimes your project might crash because there are some features that might have changed meanwhile. So that might be a problem, but of course you can fix it. So if you are looking for a particular bug fix, then you should look into updates and make sure you update the project. Okay, so to start a new project, of course, you can just select new, and you'll be prompted with a screen that shows you exactly this page. And here a lot of questions come, like, what should I pick? Should I pick 2D, 3D, HDRP, or URP? So what are these and what's the difference between them? Of course, when Unity started, it wasn't such a flexible engine as we currently have it. So they had the default render pipeline, which was basically a way to draw objects on the screen, which was more or less fixed. So that was kind of limiting at some point, and they realized this and they said, okay, now we need to make it more flexible for studios that want to do this. Of course, it's not necessary. So this is how scriptable render pipeline appeared. And of course, if you don't want to script your own render pipeline, they provide out of the box high definition render pipeline and universal render pipeline, which both are just variations of the scriptable render pipeline. And the main difference, if you switch to those, is the fact that you'll get material crashes. So you basically get materials which are pink, so you have to update the shaders because they mostly rely on shaders. So if you update your project from the default render pipeline to, let's say, universal render pipeline, your scripts won't crash. It's more likely that your visual materials, that's where it hits you the most. And also it's good to note that it's not backwards compatible. So if you want to revert from the universal render pipeline to default render pipeline, it's not possible. Also, if you pick universal render pipeline, you cannot switch to HDRP or the other way around. So you have to stick with your decision. Of course, you can transfer them, but it is going to be much harder later on. One other thing here, pros and cons, I would suggest going with the universal render pipeline. I think HDRP is for higher end. I mean, that's what they said on their webpage. So if you're targeting mobile devices or Nintendo Switch or any other platform, you should definitely go with universal render pipeline. HDRP is for higher end consoles, PS5, Xbox, the latest, and PC, of course, higher end PCs. So if you want to target every platform, then you should definitely go with URP or default render pipeline. One other issue here, it might be that if you get assets from the asset store, then you might end up with them not working properly, since most of them were created for their default render pipeline. Of course, some of them can be fixed with changing the materials, and if you see something pink, then you can just go and change the shader. I can quickly show you how to do that. And the problem here is that some don't work, and luckily others do have the functionality. So this is the asset store. Some others do have the functionality for us to just pick if we have the universal render pipeline or if we have the default render pipeline. So in that case, it's actually better to use the universal render pipeline. And here on the asset store, you get a lot of free assets or cheap assets, so you should definitely look into discounts. I have a video regarding asset flipping, which is a problem most new developers go into, which is like, oh, I have these AAA assets, but I have these low poly other assets, and you do a mashup of different elements that do not fit together, and this is how you end up with an asset flip game. And some YouTubers have made a career out of like roasting these type of games because they're just games with putting stuff together randomly. So if you're interested in that, you should definitely check Big Fry's channel. But let's move on to the project. So when you start a new project, and I'm gonna click a new project because I've already created one, what you'll see is of course Unity loading its stuff. So it might take some time, it might take less time, it depends on the project size, but you'll end up with this screen. And personally, I don't really enjoy this type of layout, and Unity allows me to change it. So I would use 2x3, and then I'd put like one column layout. So I'll use this kind of layout. Of course, it's for you to choose. So a quick introduction into Unity's interface, and why is this relevant is because if you make a game in Unity, you'll spend up 90% of your time here in this interface. So this interface is divided into several different categories. So we have the scene. The scene is where you create your game, where you put up the 3D models that make your levels. In the game view, you have, when you play the game, you will actually end up in the game view where you actually experience how the game should be played on other devices. In the hierarchy view, you will find out what objects are in the scene at the current time. You can have multiple scenes, but usually you have only one scene open at a time. A scene can be similar to a level. So if that is much more easier for you to understand, it's a level. In the project part is where we have all the assets that are in the game. So here we can have the scripts of the game, we can have all the 3D assets, we can have the sounds, everything. The main idea is to accumulate a lot of stuff in the project section, and then drag and drop them to the hierarchy and position them correctly in the scene. And then lastly, we have the inspector. The inspector is a window that works based on what you have selected at that particular moment. So I don't have anything selected at the moment. And the default scene comes with a main camera and a directional light. I'll just proceed and create a small cube. So I'll go to game object, 3D object, and cube. And here I just created the cube on the screen. And you can see if I select the cube, then I get this inspector with some properties already out of the box. So Unity is a component-based game engine. So that means that every object in the scene contains different components. All the objects contain the transform component, which provide you with the position, rotation, and scale. But some objects contain more and some contain less. In this case, since it's a visual object, it contains also the mesh renderer, which is responsible for rendering an object, and the mesh filter, which is responsible of determining what exactly it should render. So those are the different things that you can expect. Also in this case, we have the box collider, which provides automatic collision. So this is one thing that is really nice about Unity. It comes with a physics engine that you can leverage to create physics-based games or just to detect collisions and other stuff. So it's quite nice. So what I would do in this case, I would grab the game window and move it here and change to scene, because I want a lot of real estate for my scene, because I need to have a lot of space so I can clearly see what is going on with this one. So if I move, let's go to the controls now. So to move around the scene, I hold the right mouse button and move with WASD, like in a FPS game, for example, right? So I have the same FPS movement, forward, backward, and left and right, basically. To move faster, you can press Shift and hold, and then you'll have a faster speed. And the tip here that probably not a lot of you know is that if you hold the right mouse button and you rotate the scroll wheel, this number appears. This number means what is the speed if I move the camera now. So we can increase and decrease the camera. For example, if we have a really huge level that we want to edit and to have it, I'll put my camera fast because I've explained some parts. So if we have a huge level that you want to edit and go far away, of course we can just increase the speed and move further to that point. Another way to navigate, which I found it really nice, but sometimes it crashes, so that's not such convenient, is if you press F key, it will highlight an object. Of course, sometimes if the object is too big, or if you exported the whole level from Blender into Unity, you might end up with problems using this command. So it doesn't work all the time. What I would do in that case, that's another tip that I use, I create a small cube where I want to be, I move it around, and then I click F key and move to that particular position. So this is kind of the strategy to move around Unity. And now let's look at the tools that Unity provides out of the box, and these are located in the toolbox session. So the first one is the hand key, which the view tool, which I never use because I use the keys mostly. So I don't think you actually need it so much. But yeah, you can basically pan around the view and do some other movements. So probably it's more if you just use the mouse, but for game development, you also use the keyboard. The move tool, I think it's really important because it gives you control over the axis. Yeah, so you can move an object around on all three axes with the move tool. One interesting thing here is those squares that if you click them and move, you will actually move the object on that plane. The plane described by, for example, X and Y axis right now, and I can move it around on just this. For example, if I want to make sure that an object stays in the same plane as another object, I would use this functionality. The next one is rotation, and the rotation is very similar because it allows you to rotate an object as you please. You can see while I'm rotating or I'm changing other parameters, it also updates the transform. The values can be put by typing in the numbers as well. You can also click on the three dots here and reset the transform. This will set everything to 0 and scale 111 because scale 000 will be a non-existing object. The next one is scaling, and the scaling has the problem that it distorts objects. So I would not recommend you to use these individual axes for scaling. Of course, if you just use a cube, probably you won't notice it. But if you use another 3D object, you'll start to deform the object. So what I recommend here is you select the middle one and you scale uniformly. So that means that all these components of the scale are the same. This will keep the object in the same shape as exported, as intended. The next one I would say is the rect tool. But what does it mean? I mean, it doesn't provide so much functionality here because this was mostly created for the 2D canvas view, which will quickly dive into that, but I'll skip it for now. The next one, the transform tool, is all-in-one tool. Basically, you have all the combinations possible: rotation, movement, and also scaling. So that's all-in-one. It helps easing out the functionality. Of course, we have keyboard commands. So W, E, R, T, Y, and U is not this one. This one, it's mostly for editing the box colliders. We'll not go into that one in this tutorial. In the later ones, we'll probably go. And now that I have went through the tools, let's move on to these two commands. And basically what these mean is like how we move an object relative to a position. So this is a little more complex because it involves a particular axis. I think the axis is much more simple to understand because an object has its own forward, which is the z-axis, and we have global axis. So for example, if I rotate an object and now I try to move it, and now it's the global axis, this means that I can move it around on these axes, which are exactly the ones how we have them in the world, right? So I can move it like this, I can move it like this. You see they're exactly like this. But if I set it to local, you see they have changed because they do not take into account the global ones anymore. Now it's the local axis. So how can this help us? Of course, one thing here that we can use the local axis versus global axis is, for example, if we spawn a bullet. And let's say I'll quickly reset this cube, which will think is it as a bullet, right? So if we say, okay, this bullet needs to move forward, right? Okay, this bullet moves forward on this axis. So it's quite easy to move forward a bullet. But what happens if the person is not facing this direction and the bullet gets fired like this? And now I want to move the bullet forward. But if I move the bullet forward, it moves this way. But it's not correct because I've shot it from this angle. So of course, if you want to move a bullet, you would want to move that bullet with the correct axis for that bullet. So in this case, you'll move it on this axis. So you see, this is a particular functionality that you can use for this. Of course, another one would be, for example, I'm going to change this to global again. This pivot, this is mostly for rotation. And for example, let me duplicate, Control D, another cube. And I'm going to select both of the cubes, Shift Shift. So now I can either select them with Control here or with Shift, it doesn't matter. And I go to rotate. If I move them around, they will rotate in the center. That's where the pivot is. So when you select more objects, the center will be in the center of all the objects. But if you want to move each object individually and you don't want to have this kind of movement, for example, I want to move these cubes, but I don't want to move each one individually because it takes too much time and I know every cube needs to be moved the same amount, I can easily go to this one, change to pivot, and if I rotate now, each cube will spin on its own axis, not on the center point. So this is quite convenient if you have, for example, like a temple with a lot of pillars and we want to rotate the pillars, but you don't want to rotate the whole temple with the pillars. We just want to rotate them in place because they don't see fit, right? So I can easily do this and it will work. So that's why this command it is. Okay, so we went through the basics of Unity, but one last thing for this session that I want to point out is how to transition from default render pipeline to universal render pipeline. I think that one is really important and I think a lot of people have a lot of uncertainties about that. So for this, I need to create a new material. So to create a new material, I just go Assets, right click, Create and Material. Each object to be drawn on the screen, it needs to have a material. A material is basically a container saying which shader runs to display the object. A shader is a script in its own format, it's not C# that is run on the graphics card and it tells it how to display that object. So now to put a material to an object, I can simply drag and drop it onto that object. And you see it got changed here. So it says new material. Now going back to this material, I can change its color. And you see it has the shader standard. So that's the problem. The standard shader is not available for the universal render pipeline. So of course, if I would to upgrade the project now, it won't work. So if your project is the default, like I have it now, to know this, okay, I don't know what type of project it is, then I can go to Edit, Project Settings, okay, if I disable the camera quickly. So if I go to the project settings and go to the graphics here, I find that scriptable render pipeline settings here, it's empty. This means that you are running on the default render pipeline strategy. So to update the project, it's a little more complex than the other way around, because URP doesn't come included in Unity default. And this is kind of Unity's strategy moving forward, is that they release new versions which will mostly contain updates and fixes. So this is why it's not really important that you have 2020 or 2021, because a lot of the features that Unity provides, extra features, even the input, comes in the package manager. So if I go to Window and Package Manager, this is where we'll get all the functionalities that Unity additionally provides for us. And if we initially select a project to be URP in the Create Project scene, what it actually does is actually installs the URP. So I can check the package. Of course, it's not in the project, so I need to go in Unity registry because this is a Unity package. So Universal Render Pipeline, you see here that this is the package, which is interesting for me because this is how I wanted to get into the project. And of course, a lot of other functionalities Unity will provide in the project based on this package manager. And they already integrated the asset store with the package manager, so you can also use it for the packages. But right now, we're going to install the Universal Render Pipeline. Of course, if you create a new project with Universal Pipeline, this is going to be handled automatically, so you will not see it. But I'm just going to show you how to change quickly a project from one to another. Of course, the other way around works as well. You just remove it from the project settings, you just remove it from the graphics, and you should get the default. Of course, you need to update all the materials, so that's a small problem, but of course, you can do it. One tip here that I want to point out is actually knowing what project you want to do from the beginning. And you can experiment like with your packages that you have bought from the asset store, what works with URP or what works with the default render pipeline. Because in some cases, it might not actually be possible to update. So it's better to know in advance and then start the project, because otherwise you'll end up with a big project that it's really hard to move around. It might sound that Unity wants to make our life complicated, but actually this offers us a lot of flexibility with the package manager and all the scriptable render pipelines. Of course, for beginners, it's not easy, but the main thing to know is that the rendering pipelines are just for visual stuff. So all the code, all the other assets like sounds, like levels, are not influenced in any way for this. So that's really convenient for us. Okay, moving on. So now we have the Universal Render package in the project, and I can go back to project settings. Of course, I don't have any pipeline asset, and we need to create some pipeline assets. And in here, if I right click, I need to find where the render, I hope I find it, the render pipeline assets. So rendering, Universal Render Pipeline, and of course, I would want a forward renderer. Oh, wait a second, I need the pipeline because it provides two objects. And if we drag this onto the graphics scriptable render pipeline settings, this is where basically the magic happens. By magic, I mean the cube becomes pink. So this is what you'll end up if you just have transitioned from the default render pipeline to the scriptable render pipeline, in our case universal render pipeline. So now I have to go to the material. So there are two ways to change this. So one way, the easiest way, is to just go to edit, render pipeline, universal render pipeline, and I can say upgrade project materials to universal render pipeline materials. And this will automatically fix the material for us. So it's really convenient because you can easily upgrade from one type of project to another. But if you want to do it yourself, what you can do is enter in each material, see if it's pink. And the problem here is with the shader, because the shader, you see now it's universal render pipeline lit. It was the standard one. So basically you go through all your materials and you see if it's pink here, then you need to change the shader to the one that you want. So for example, in our case, we want it lit. Lit means that it's affected by the scene light. So for example, if I rotate this light, so the light in Unity is considered just another game object, but it has the component light. So for this, if I just move it around, you'll see that the object gets shaded on different sides. If I click on this object and change the material to, for example, unlit, you'll see that all of the sides, all the object sides get lit the same. This is because it's not affected by the Unity light anymore. So this is, for example, if you want, let's say, some particles. You don't want particles, I mean, yeah, you might want some particles being lit up by some Unity light, but in some cases you don't want it. But of course, for particles, we do have special shaders, which are under universal render pipeline particles, and you can pick whatever you want. Mostly people use unlit here. But I'll switch it back to lit because this is how we... And a quick note here. So the difference between lit and simple lit is that simple lit has less parameters. So if you see here, I have the surface inputs and advanced. This is the simple lit, and for the lit, I have a lot more. So why should we pick a material that has less than more? Well, it's simple. It's for optimizing reasons. So if we don't need all those parameters, we should opt for the simple lit. This is because if you make a mobile game, for example, you don't have the raw rendering power that the PC has. So every material rendered, it will cost you and it will make your game run slower. So if you don't need a particular one, then you can just go with that. Okay, I think this is it for the universal render pipeline. If you have other questions, I would like to hear them. So if you have questions, also want to say again, the C# series will start tomorrow. So it's already uploaded and it will be available, I think, around 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock Central European time. So if you're interested in that, you should definitely check it. I'll continue this series. I'll also try to get a lot of questions from your side and try to answer them as much as possible. But Unity is a complex thing, so we'll have to take it step by step. Okay, so the first question, why does it say fail to load window layout when I create a new project? Yeah, there is actually a problem that's bothering latest Unity versions, I would say. I think it started 1 year ago. I don't remember exactly, but it's a layout problem. And it's basically a lot of errors that keep coming, saying that, oh, you have to reset your layout, you have to use the default one. In that case, you might fix it by trying all of the buttons, if not canceling, and hope that the next time it works. what I found useful is you can delete the library folder from the project because that's automatically generated. There are some other automatically generated folders that you can try deleting. I think you should check on the internet which exactly. But it's basically an error. So yeah, you have to kind of like hard code your way around it. Okay, so right now it's not so many questions. One thing that I also want to point out, because I said about the UI canvas. So Unity also provides us with the UI functionality. And here I can just create like a game. Oh, sorry, I haven't changed my screen. So I can create a UI from the game object. And it automatically spawns a canvas. If I hit 2D, then it just locks us to a plane of vision and we can edit the canvas. And here the rect tool starts to become useful because we can change how the object, how the UI object works. And a question here, a common question here. I want to make a 2D game in Unity, so the code for 3D doesn't work, or the other way around. And I would say that in Unity, a 2D game is actually treated as a 3D game, but with one axis blocked. So what does it mean? So for example, if I create an image, which right now is just a square, right? But it can be our character if we have a proper art for it. We don't have yet. So here you can see I can change the X position and I can change the Y position. But wait a second, I also have the Z position, but if I change it, nothing happens. But this is the point. Unity is not actually having a special 2D part. It just blocks one axis from use. So what does it mean? It means, for example, if we have scripts for 3D stuff, they will work for 2D as well. The other way around, but it will be, let's say, like a 2.5D game in 3D. Like if you know Trine game or other side scrollers which are 3D but locked onto two planes. One plane, not two planes. So in here, if I remove the 2D, I can see that it does change position. It changes the Z. So let's see if I duplicate this and move it around and reset, and also give it a different colors. So this is a way. It's actually not a way. So you might think that this way allows you to change how the elements get rendered on the screen, right? So in a 2D game, the problem is getting stuff rendered correctly on top of each other. So you'd say, oh, if I change the Z here, then it will work. No, for 2D, Unity is not giving us this option. Would be really cool because it will help us a lot, but there are other ways to change an element's position. It's not this one. So it's actually the render order, but it's not for this particular episode. Okay, other questions? Because I think other questions. Okay, so QQ says, any advice on how to optimize the file size of sprite arts, JPEG, PNG, so your game runs better and not lag on PC mobile? So Unity out of the box allows you to change what type of optimization you want for an image, so that's helpful. But for example, in more depth, if you have a big atlas of moves of let's say animations for the player, then that's a huge texture. So you might look into, instead of using a predefined set of animations, you might use for animations created in Unity, and you just export, like for example, like the arms and legs of a character, and then you start to rig it and you start to have the animations in Unity. This way you'll have a smaller sprite sheet, because you only contain the parts that move in a character and not the whole atlas. But of course you can also use the optimizations that Unity offers. One thing to note here is that Unity doesn't put in the project, in the final build of the project, all the stuff that you have in your project folder. It just puts the stuff that is used in the scenes. So that means it's also an optimization, because you see like, oh, my project is 10 gigs, but the export file might be much smaller because Unity compresses all the stuff. Unity doesn't put all the stuff in the project, only what is used. So those are optimizations that come out of the box with Unity. Okay. Local multiplayer. So local multiplayer, this is another question. Local multiplayer is probably the most easiest thing to do, because you need to spawn different elements in the scene. For example, let's say one cube with a movement script, and then the other cube with the same movement script. And then we can have a toggle between is player 1 and is player 2. And then we can say, oh, if it's player 1, then we'll use this set of keys, let's say the arrow keys, and if it's player 2, then we'll use the WSD keys. So this is how we can get a local multiplayer. Yeah, I'm glad that it helped QQQ. I think most optimizations should be on the programming side and also on the rendering side, because that's what's the most heavy duty. But of course, yeah, the memory as in storage is very important as well. One last thing I want to say about that QQQ and what you should check out is also streamable assets. It's addressable assets, my bad. It's a new feature that Unity released, and what it does, you actually store all the game assets in the cloud, and you send the executable to someone, you send the APK to someone, which is empty, which is just 1 megabyte file. And then when somebody runs, it will just download all the necessary assets from your cloud. So that is the most heaviest optimization that you can do, because if you have like 100 levels and each level uses just 10% of the assets there, someone will at every time will just use 10% of the game instead of downloading the whole 100%. I don't know mini militia. Let me quickly check it out to see. Yeah, addressable assets. Yeah, you should definitely check it. Okay, I'm quickly gonna check mini militia to see if I can help you with that. But offline multiplayer. It looks like it's I don't know exactly, but offline multiplayer. Hey Yohoji, yeah, hey. There are a couple of different multiplayers. There are local multiplayer, which can be on the same device. There can be multiplayers which might be on the same Wi-Fi or on the same LAN. There might be multiplayers which are not in the same time, like for example Hideo Kojima's game, his latest game, Death Stranding, where you interact with players, but you do something in the environment and then they see it. So that's another type of multiplayer. One other type of multiplayer which exists is in Forza Horizon games is a ghost car which learns from you, and then you have to play with your other friends, but they're not actually playing. There's an AI that behaves like them. I don't know exactly what militia. I think they probably have multiplayer, as I can see it from here. Probably you can connect locally. So I think in this case is just as regular multiplayer would be implemented, but it uses, yeah, it basically is a Wi-Fi LAN again, but it's the same. Of course, you won't be able to use Photon for this, so I suggest, yeah, I would not go for Mirror, because that is not an actual really good library. I mean, I've read some articles. It's based on a deprecated Unity multiplayer. So Unity deprecated their multiplayer system for a reason that it was not good, and Mirror just continues that. So of course it continues something that was not good. So instead, what you can do, there are some good networking solutions. For one that I've seen, Zapnet. Of course, it's paid. It's on the asset store. I wanted to try it. I didn't have the chance, but of course, if you use that and you create a local server, and then the others connect to that local server, and it should just work fine. Of course, the problem is if you use that, for example, for online multiplayer game, then you'll end up with the issues with the network address translation. So that means if you create a server here, and if you don't have port forwarding or UPnP or other system, then the other players won't be able to connect to your game session. So that's the problem Photon fixes, because they have some cloud servers which can Wi-Fi LAN games are just LAN games where you create the server, so you need just a library. I mean, you can use even Mirror for this. It doesn't matter. So just download Mirror for free, or Zapnet, which is paid, but I think it's much more better. And then you have your own IP, and you send that IP, which is easier on the local LAN games, because usually they have an IP range, and you can search how can I detect servers on that IP range, and then you don't even have to provide the IP. If you remember, like in the old days, if you played Counter-Strike, then you would have gone to the server list, and then it will do a full swipe. It's usually, I think, around 255 possible numbers. So they just check everyone and see if there is a server at that address, and if it is, then of course you can connect to it. Okay, so another question from QQQ: should beginners use the latest version of Unity whenever there's a new update, or should we stick to our current version? Yeah, so here I would say, if you are lazy, yeah, you don't have to update, it's no problem. If you want stability, you shouldn't update randomly. If you're looking for a particular feature, for example, an update which fixes a problem that you need it fixed, or you need some update on a specific new feature that's not even implemented but it will be, then you should definitely update. If not, you should wait. The stable ones are much more better. Of course, I wouldn't suggest that you should go back to 2019 long-term support, because 2020 has a lot of more features to offer. So mostly the long-term support one is for people that have released games that need to support those games on the platforms that they have, and they have a player base, and they cannot disappoint players by saying, oh, now I'm going to update the project and it crashes and it doesn't work and you paid for your game. So that's not possible. You see, so those people that are constrained to a version, Unity or Unreal. I personally have used both. I would say Unreal is a very, very heavy engine in terms of just by starting it up, just by running it, just by compiling files with it. You can do AAA in Unity as well. I think it's not important because indie game developers don't actually, they don't have the budget or time to do AAA games. So I can just run the HDRP and I have AAA quality in Unity as well, but I won't do it. One other thing is that it might be deceivingly easy to think that you can do everything in blueprints in Unreal, but at some point you'll have to go to C++, which is a pain. I've worked in C++ for a long time, and it's a pain. In Unreal, it's a pain. Of course, I've also have friends which work with Unreal, and they told me that they had problems with the engine. So I recommend Unity for this reason. Of course, you can also try Godot if you don't want to pay if you're successful to Unity, which I think for what Unity offers, it's still a good deal. But you can go for Godot, which is free. I think if for example like this, if you want a simple 2D game, you should go for Godot. If you want a simple 2D game that you want it for other platforms, you should consider using Unity, because Unity allows export for a lot of different platforms. For example, I want my game to be on phone, I want it to be on iOS, on Android, on Nintendo Switch, and you don't know if your game is going to be a success or not. But if you worked 1 year for your game and then you realize, hey, wait a second, I need to export this game tomorrow to a different platform. Of course, it's not going to be 1 day, it will still take time, but it will be much faster that you, for example, implemented the full game in there is this engine called Love2D, and then you need it in 1 month the game to be on let's say the latest iPhone. Well, it doesn't work like that, but with Unity, yeah, you can do it. You can do it even faster. So that is one of the powers of using Unity, which is quite good. Okay, other questions? I'm looking forward for your questions. So if you have something that's, since this is Unity Basics, of course, we have a lot of other stuff going on, but I think it's important to make sure that you get the decision correctly from the beginning, so that you don't waste time learning other stuff and then coming back to Unity or back and forth. But as is, game development is a huge topic in general, so if you get some help from the tools that you have, if you get the help from some assets that you can already buy or just download for free, then it saves you a lot of time, so you don't have to learn everything. You can just start with what is necessary and then start to refine the other stuff as well. So that would be like the path that you want to take to have a successful game, because in the end it will take time, and if you don't see any progress, then you lose motivation to continue. So it's really important to do something that you actually see is as progress. Yeah, this is the same with programming. You write 100 lines of code and then you see a cube rotating. Yeah, cool. That's not helpful. It's not a real progress. Okay, for a total beginner, any recommendation for books on C# to strengthen our foundation on programming? I don't personally have any preference for any book. I myself haven't checked any C# books. When I was younger in high school, I read actually C++ books, and since they're not so different, of course I filled in the different concepts of C# from C++ basically. But of course, I think it's really important to have a strong foundation in programming in general. So this is why I'm creating this introduction to C#, which starts tomorrow. So QQQ, if you're interested in that, I recommend you check my video that starts up tomorrow, because it takes everyone from scratch in C# and it explains the basics, and you'll get a strong foundation. Of course, that sometimes it might be a little boring because it's going to be technical, so you have to be prepared. Google AdMob or Unity ads? I do not have any experience with ads. I've read that Unity ads are much simpler to implement. But yeah, make sure when you're using ads that they do not deter the players from playing your game, because players hate ads. So here, as Awesome Toots Fahir said also on the QA that we had on the channel, what he did for his game, he actually put a counter to show ads after a couple of times for the player. Yeah, so try to make sure that when you get ads in place, do not deter players away from your game. What I also found it interesting is actually making ads that reward people. For example, like, oh, you want this power up? Oh, you have to watch these 5 ads, for example. This will make people watch them actually instead of forcing them, because nobody wants forced stuff. But yeah, it's much easier to say, oh, you get the free life here and you don't have to start from the beginning if you watch this ad. Quite easy. Other questions? Okay, let me check if I have something else. So one thing that I also skipped kind of like in the initial QA was what are the minimum requirements for you to make a game? Like what you should know to make a game. So I would say that you need 2 things. You need programming skills, because you need to give life to what you have, but also you need art skills. Of course, you don't need to be expert in any of these fields. I created a video called how to make art as a programmer, so you can do a lot of programmer art. There are tools there. I mean, you can do ASCII art, you can do simple art. There are also free assets. I don't recommend using free assets in a commercial product because you'll end up with an asset flip. But I would definitely say that the most important roles are art and programming in a game. One thing here, of course, sound is really important, level design is really important, but if you master, if you have experience in programming and art, you can do something. If you just create a level, then it's useless. If you just create a sound, then that's useless. Okay. Yeah, it seems like the stream broke for 1 second, so now it's back and working. So that's really good. But I think we're mostly covered with the questions. Of course, if you have other questions, for example, what platform should you target first? I think you should target, when you start game development, you should target Windows desktop, because it's the most easiest platform that you can run your games into. Of course, then if you want to do mobile games, you have Android, which is much easier than iOS. And for consoles, you can go with Xbox. I think that's the most easiest console to get into. But I recommend you definitely start with Windows desktop and then move from that one. Oh, nice. I see a blue light bulb with some text. But yeah, it's so is degree compulsory for job? No. In game development and in other jobs, I would say in programming, mostly people ask where you worked. In game development, especially, what games have you released? Basically, you need to have a strong portfolio. If you don't have a strong portfolio, then it doesn't matter what degree you have. They might not even look at your degree. They need to know that you know your stuff, and in some cases they actually require for you to have worked at a AAA game, for a AAA game. So this is why in my interview with Fahir, I said that it's better for people to go in a medium to large game company if they start, to get that work on a AAA game as possible. If not, then you'll be in trouble. Of course, you can start with mobile game companies, and if you have a couple of games that you worked and are online and doing something, then it will give you an advantage over the other candidates. So yeah, I don't think a degree is compulsory. I mean, it might be good, but it's definitely not compulsory, at least here in Sweden. And here in Sweden, in Stockholm, there are over 100 game companies in the city. And there are a lot of really talented people working here and some really big companies. And yeah, it's a lot of competition, and you have to be really good at what you're doing. Okay, other questions, if there are. I'm looking forward for other beginner questions. One thing, when you start creating a game, start creating a small game. I would recommend here, for example, Snake, or Breakout, or Space Invaders. Start with these kind of games. Don't go for MMOs for your first game. Everyone did it, but you can be one step ahead if you start with this, because people realize that they cannot do MMO after they spent a lot of time. And the problem sticking very long in a particular game that it will fail in the end is the fact that you won't diversify your knowledge. Initially, you'll learn a lot. For example, if you're doing an MMO RPG, right? You'll learn a lot about movement, about some particular functionalities, but then you'll get stuck into implementing some particular functionalities which won't offer you that much learning experience. So I suggest implementing a lot of different types of games. For example, FPS, racing, strategy, and different types, so that you get a better understanding on how everything works. Also, a good way to do this is participating in game jams. We had our first game jam, Let's Redefine 2021. It was a massive success. You can check my live stream on that as well. You can also play the games on itch.io. I also timestamped the live stream with also the links to all the games. So if you're interested in that, you can definitely check it out. So that's a really good way to not only to make your skills, because game development it's not about your technical skills or about your art skills. It's about if players enjoy playing your game. So this is the problem, because a lot of people provide solid games, really nice games, but the problem here is that they don't have they're not fun to play. I have a video about fun to play if you're interested in that, but to learn how to make a fun to playing game is if you, for example, go into game jams, you submit your game, and people usually give feedback, like say, oh, you can improve that and you can do that instead. Don't be negative about the feedback that you receive. Take it, really process that feedback, understand what you need to change, and then you'll get better and understanding what the people want. And this is how you get success in game development, not just by learning the technicalities of it, by learning what people want from your games. Because in the end, you'll have to sell your games to them, not to you. If you sell them to yourself, you'll not be a successful game developer. Okay, Tormenting Theo. I'm watching your Among Us series and I love it. It's the only tutorial I could find that showed me what I need for my own multiplayer game. Yeah, I'm glad that you liked it. I will start, as I said, I'll start the C# from tomorrow, Unity C# programming from scratch. I've also started this stream with Unity Basics, which will cover how to use the engine in general, and if you want the scripting, you'll have the regular videos. So yeah, that's really good. Of course, there are a lot of things, and some people recommend you in particular, you should use Photon or you should use Mirror, but they don't tell you what are why you should use it. And I haven't myself told you why you should use Photon or why you should use Mirror. Is because, for example, in Photon case, you actually, if you use Photon, it saves you a lot of trouble with network address translation. But also, for example, let's take it this way. What if you make a multiplayer game, you have success, and then you implemented your game with Mirror, and you have to host your own server? Okay, yeah, let's buy a host, put the server there, and of course 10,000 players connect to that server and it crashes immediately. So this means that your server doesn't scale, and that's normal because it's really hard to maintain. You need probably a team of DevOps that maintain your servers, that properly scale your infrastructure. But using a network solution like Photon or other solutions, you can just click one button and you immediately scale your game so it can handle the amount of players. I mean, if you look at Pokemon, when they released, they had the infrastructure, but they had such a massive demand that even they crashed. So if they crashed with the infrastructure, just imagine you running one server on one host, what would happen? I mean, and players don't have a lot of patience. So if you lose the players for a couple of hours, this might make the difference between life and death of your game. So it's really important to make sure. Yeah, so okay, QQQ is asking, is your channel aimed at beginners who have zero programming experience or have some experience? Well, the Among Us series, well, it tells you everything. So I don't know exactly what type of experience. Probably, I assume that you need to have the basic amount of Unity experience with the Among Us series, because I fast forward through some UI functionalities. The channel is going to be focused from now on, of course, the basics and beginners. But what I think is the most important part, it will be focused on how to get success with your games and how to make fun games, how to make successful games, and what can we learn from the industry to make us better game developers in general. So yeah, it would be basically your one-stop shop for game development, hopefully. I hope it answers your questions, QQQ. Can I make my own server for my game? Yeah, you can make your own server. You can host your own server. If you make it from scratch, if you learn network programming and you make it from scratch, you'll have problems because there are a lot of smaller things that are really hard to find, and you'll end up creating the server instead of making your game. If you host your server, which is running, for example, Mirror or other architecture, then you'll end up in this situation that it doesn't scale properly at some point. Of course, if you just aim for the how you asked before, I think the local offline multiplayer, I think, yeah, you can make your own server, because if you play it with your friends, like 5 people, 10 people, it works just fine. You should definitely go for it. Loving the direction of the channel is heading forward. Game design. Yeah, it's not only game design. Yeah, it's a lot of stuff about game development, and a lot of other stuff. It's not only the design and the technicalities, the programming, the art. It's also the stuff that you don't see. For example, are your game ideas important? Or what skills do you need? Or how can you actually sell your game? Or where to go and sell your game? Or how to come up with successful game ideas? Or a lot of stuff that people don't talk on YouTube about this. And it's really important, because game development is not just creating a game and putting it on Steam. That won't guarantee success. What I'm interested in finding out, of course, no one can guarantee success, but you can definitely guarantee a much shorter amount of time for you to get success if you do some particular things than just trying everything randomly, right? So if you, for example, know that, hey, wait a second, I need to learn this and I need to focus on this, instead of wasting 3 years of creating your own game engine, of course, that means in 3 years you won't have any success, right? So if you use Unity, then we just cut off 3 years from your success time. So that's I think really important. But yeah, we'll cover a lot of subjects here on this channel, so I definitely recommend you check it out, see what comes next. I also have some surprises, hopefully this year, but more on that later, not now. I haven't even planned them myself, but I just have them in my head, so I need to push them forward. other stuff that's going on, please, yeah, just write in the chat and I'll have a discussion with you. Of course, it can be whatever you may ask of game development. By the way, I have a couple of games released on Steam which are failures. You mostly learn from your failures, not from your successes. If you have success, you don't know what you did right, but if you fail on something, then you definitely know what you did wrong. And yeah, one problem here would be trying to copy a success story or trying to copy other trends that are going. And this might work, but then you have to compete with a lot of other people on the same page. So it's quite hard at some point. For example, like one releases Flappy Bird, it's a massive success, and then like you see 100 other Flappy Birds. And that's mostly the issue. You should find in advance and be one step forward, not 2 steps back by copying some other people's success. You can do that, and you can reach a little success, but yeah, it's definitely not the way to go. Okay, other. So yeah, just enter chat and type in your question, and if not in 5 minutes probably I'll wrap up everything. So if you don't have any further questions, I can quickly tell you the plan for the next couple of weeks. We'll go first, we'll continue this series. We'll also continue the C# that's gonna start tomorrow, but also I have some own videos that would be oh, wait a second. So how would you deal with the thought of someone cloning your game if your game turns out to be successful? Well, usually if your game is successful, you get a lot of credits for it. You get a lot of money for it. And if it's the second person that does the game or the third person, usually people say, oh, so you did a game like that game. So they will not attribute any success to the other people. And of course you collected all the revenue or what you wanted from that game. So it's not really important if someone copies your success. I think it's being successful in the first place and aiming for that, and not worrying about other people. And you should not worry about someone stealing your ideas, because everyone has their own ideas and nobody wants to implement somebody else's ideas. So yeah, this is why a lot of hobby game development teams fail, because everyone works for free, of course, and every person has their own ideas and they cannot decide which one to go for. So this is why I'm not afraid of someone cloning my idea before, but if it has success, then probably, for example, like if you check how much money Among Us made, you'll find out that, I mean, even if someone else copies their ideas, yeah, it's no problem. I mean, they made a lot of money out of it. So yeah, cool. Thank you for joining, and stay tuned for the video tomorrow, and of course for the next Unity basic sessions. So thank you all, and have a nice evening. If you're Central European, if you're another part of the world, good morning or good night, and see you around. I'm Adrian, and I'm signing out.